Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm your host, one of your hosts, Katie Halper.
And I'm Aaron Matte. How are you, Katie?
I'm good, you?
I'm fine. I'm well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm traveling. This is not my bedroom. This is a hotel. Just so people don't think I'm taping from my bedroom, which is...
The bed shot is a surefire sign that someone's on the road, you know?
Yeah, it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the road, yeah. I'm on the
fantastic bed making job. Very impressive.
Right?
Very impressive.
Yeah, thank you. I had to do a good job with that. That would have been very shameful. Not sure what's going on. The little abstract art behind me. Again, not my choice. Don't want people to think I would choose that.
I love it. Well, look, should we get to it? We got so much to get to today.
We do have so much to get to. But before we get to it, you know, sometimes people really enjoy when we talk about what's going on in our lives. And I want to share that I met a very adorable creature out here on my trip. I'm actually here to meet my friend's baby for the first time, but I met another baby that my friend has. Let's just show this adorable shot.
Katie meets another cute dog.
Another cute dog. I hope Bodhi isn't jealous. Let's see. Let's zoom in on that. Look at that dog. First of all, we match. It looks like she's my daughter or something.
You do match.
We have similar hair,
very
right?
Long hair.
To really give the people. Okay, look at that face. Have you ever seen I mean, Bodhi's my dog Bodhi is as cute, but this one's up there. Right
out of the Ewoks.
She's more of a Chewbacca, I think.
Interesting. You see Chewbacca.
Yeah.
I see do. Ewok, you see Chewbacca. We all see different things, but that's what's amazing about life and living life through the prism of the Star Wars universe.
But look, you can't see where my hair starts and hers ends.
That's a great point.
Anyway, she's adorable. So, all right. Well, now that we've given our fans that parasocial connection that they so crave, let's get into the politics of the week.
All right. Well, so we got our 4 basic food groups. Democrats suck. Republicans suck. Isn't that weird? Isn't that terrible? This week I have Democrats suck. So much to choose from. But let's start with what is a big, huge loss for the disinformation community. This is the community of people who have branded themselves to be the police officers, the global police officers of disinformation, whatever that means. And this week, the Democrats suffered a major loss when just 3 weeks after announcing a new disinformation board to be headed by a woman named Nina Jankowicz, they announced all of a sudden that the disinformation board has to shut down. And what did they blame for the failure of the disinformation board? Well, none other than disinformation itself. The disinformation board under Biden could not handle disinformation, they say, being spread about the disinformation board. So let's see what the new White House press secretary had to say about that.
So if it's pausing because you think the board was mischaracterized, then the disinformation board is being shut down because of disinformation? Is that what's happening here?
Look, I mean, the board was put forth for a purpose, right? To make sure that we really did address what was happening across the country when it came to disinformation.
And it's okay right now.
It's going to pause. There's been a mischaracterizations from outside forces, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to pause it and we're going to do an assessment. But the work doesn't stop. We're still going to continue the work. The DHS is still going to continue the work.
Department of Homeland Security. That's amazing. DHS. Yeah.
So that's Karine Jean-Pierre, the new White House press secretary. And look, putting aside for a second the whole premise of this disinformation board was a joke. The government has no right to be policing disinformation. And the person that they chose to head it, Nina Jankowicz, has spread a lot of disinformation herself, as we've talked about. And we'll talk about more today later on the show with our guest. But the very fact that this disinformation board has to shut down because they can't allegedly handle disinformation or mischaracterization about itself, it speaks volumes. And it raises the question, like, if you can't even rebut disinformation supposedly about your disinformation board, what right do you have to be policing disinformation elsewhere if you can't even rebut disinformation that's about you?
You're so bad at it. How bad are you? That's so pathetic. Did they get their feelings hurt? I don't understand. I guess they were just such a crock that they couldn't be in the spotlight anymore. So they had to dissolve. But I'm really surprised because we've seen the work of this Nina woman and it's stellar. Should we show a clip of that?
All right. Well, look, for people, we've shown the clip before. You've seen it
again, but
you've seen it. But if you haven't seen it, then you got to watch it. And apologies to anybody who has seen it. One more time.
Yeah.
For old time's sake,
For all
as a
time's sake,
farewell to Nina Jankowicz.
Yes, exactly.
The very briefly installed head of the Disinformation Board. Here is Nina Jankowicz sharing her expertise on disinformation.
Laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. When Rudy Giuliani shared bad intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice or vote. Oh, information laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origin seems slightly less atrocious.
I'm so sad that that woman is no longer shepherding us through this age of disinformation with her very clever musical covers of Mary Poppins songs.
It's really going to be one of those enduring political mysteries, is how did a disinformation board headed by someone like that fail so spectacularly? I don't know. Yeah. Anyway,
Nina Jankowicz is very bad at her job at disinformation because she is really, really bad. That's just off the top of my head. I can't make fun of her. But by next week, I'm gonna have a good cover song that's even better than that and better than hers.
Yeah. Anyway, so
it's gonna be called The Ballad of Nina Jankowicz.
All right. Well, look. So for the quick failure of the Disinformation Board, that is another reason why Democrats suck.
Yeah, it is. And I wonder if our guest is one of the reasons that they had to disband. Because as we'll get to later, he did a great piece on this Disinformation Board.
That's right.
All right, so here's a heartwarming story about Republicans and why they honestly, truly do suck. Reading up Business Insider, here are the 9 Republicans who voted against a bill to help poor families buy baby formula amid the ongoing shortage. 9 Republicans voted against a bill in Congress that would help lower-income women secure baby formula for their children. Many Republicans crossed party lines to vote for H.R. 7791, the Access to Baby Formula Act, which passed the House on Wednesday. However, the bill, which comes amid a crisis where parents are struggling to procure baby formula for their children, was voted down by 9 Republican lawmakers, which is insane. The no votes were cast by GOP reps Andy Biggs, Lauren Boebert, Thomas Massey, Clay Higgins, Matt Gaetz, Chip Roy, Paul Gosar, Louis Gohmert, and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now the bill goes to the Senate. What kind of sociopath do you have to be to vote against this?
A Republican. Look, this is what's so crazy about this.
I guess, right?
The Republicans had a real opportunity, and Marjorie Taylor Greene took advantage of it, with Democrats, including the squad, I have to say, voting unanimously for $40 billion more for Ukraine, right. Most of that going to weapons contractors. And so people like Marjorie Taylor Greene were saying, we're giving $40 billion to a Ukraine proxy war at a time when mothers lack baby formula. So for a moment, Marjorie Taylor Greene, as crazy as it sounds, had the high ground. I really think that she did, over even the squad, who are voting to fund a catastrophic and dangerous proxy war that will enrich war profiteers. And what does Marjorie Taylor Greene do with that high ground?
She quickly lost that high ground when she voted against this bill.
She loses it. Exactly. She squanders it. She won't vote to give low-income mothers baby formula, the same baby formula that she was talking about when criticizing Democrats. So right. Democrats are lucky to have the Republicans as their opponents. They really are.
Yeah, what a gift. These ghouls, absolute ghouls. Yeah. So that's this week's Republican suck. And wow, do they really suck.
Sold. All right. So for Isn't That Weird, we have another story related to pregnancies, motherhood, except this is a case of fraud where in Georgia, an ex-state official who faked 3 pregnancies pleads guilty to fraud charges. A highly paid former state official accused of faking 3 pregnancies has pleaded guilty to identity fraud and making false statements. Robin Folsom was the former director of external affairs for the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. Folsom left her job as the top communications official after being charged with 4 felony counts of trying to defraud the state earlier this year. The head of the state agency that uncovered the scam said he's never seen such a case and doesn't expect to see another like it. Folsom's alleged scheme began to unravel in March 2021 when a GVRA coworker noticed that Folsom was wearing what appeared to be a fake pregnancy costume under her clothes. In May 2021, prosecutors said Folsom created a fictitious identity for the alleged father of her alleged children and subsequently shared the false information to request time off for the alleged birth of her second child. We're talking about 3 pregnancies that were faked. State Inspector General Scott McAfee said, we're talking about a completely fictitious email account she used to email the director of an agency and lie about what was happening. And this person was completely made up. Damn.
Yeah. The best part of the story is that one of the reasons she was outed is because her like prosthetic big pregnant belly fell off. That's how one of her coworkers figured it out, which must have been an amazing moment.
Yeah. What do you say in that moment when your prosthetic fake pregnancy belly falls off?
Oops.
Oops.
Actually, what you say is, oops, I did it again in this case, because I guess this isn't the first time.
Yeah, she did it 3 times. Kudos to her for some creativity. I mean, not too many scams go down like that one. So that's some creative thinking.
Yeah, outside the box. Yeah, definitely. And speaking of outside of the box, do we have a box-based story for you? Reading at the Daily Star, dead woman shocks mourners and bangs on coffin to say she's alive during her own funeral. Rosa Kayaka shocked funeral goers after medics said she died in a crash. Rosa was immediately rushed to hospital midway through the service, but was pronounced dead for a second time. That's so terrible. A woman who was pronounced dead shocked her loved ones at her funeral after they heard knocking from inside her coffin. Rosa Isabel Cespedes Kayaka dramatically interrupted the service by banging on the box in the city of Lambayeque in Peru last week. She had been announced as a fatal casualty after being involved in a catastrophic crash, which also took the life of her brother-in-law. Her 3 nephews were left with serious injuries following the incident, which took place on the region's Chiclayo Pixie Road. Following the tragedy, Rosa was placed in a coffin ahead of her funeral last Tuesday, but mourners gasped when they heard noises at the start of the service. Her relatives, who had hoisted the structure onto their shoulders, immediately lowered it and opened the lid to find her alive and peering at them. Cemetery caretaker Juan Segundo Cajo commented, "She opened her eyes and was sweating. I immediately went to my office and called the police." Her family picked up the coffin and took it to the referential hospital Feranafe in Lambayeque, with Rosa still inside. Concerned medics put Rosa on life support after they noticed she had weak signs of life, but she sadly died a few hours later. That's sad.
That's very sad.
Right? And it's almost good news. She almost was born, she's kind of Christ-like. She was like resurrected because she hadn't actually died. But you wonder what kind of healthcare she could have received if she hadn't been accidentally pronounced dead.
Exactly. That's the tragedy.
Yeah, it is a tragedy, yeah. So that's definitely falls under, isn't that terrible? What's weird is I believe that Peru was where a mayor hid in a coffin. We did a story on that back in the day when, what Taibbi was here. But I'm pretty sure that was... it was a Peruvian mayor who hid in a coffin to hide the fact that he wasn't wearing a mask. So there's this is a trend of coffin-based Peru stories. Yeah, Peru mayor accused of lying in coffin, playing dead to avoid being caught disobeying lockdown orders. So that's what it was. Okay, he hid in a coffin and pretended to be dead to avoid being caught flouting stay-at-home orders. Police say Jaime Rolando Urbina Torres, the mayor of Tantara, was out drinking with friends Monday night when police came to enforce a curfew. Local media has criticized the mayor for not taking the pandemic seriously and failing to step up safety checks.
That's very creative thinking. Kudos to him. That's impressive. I wouldn't have thought of that. I would have just said, "Oh, sorry, I'm busted." He went for the coffin. So
there's the mayor hiding in an open casket. Or a canoe, unclear, but it's something that he's hiding in. But the best part is he learned that he's wearing a mask and pretending to be dead.
Good for him. Honestly, I respect the creativity there. He's going all the way with it.
He really is. Yeah.
Playing dead and wearing the mask. Good for him.
Yeah. Good for him. Yeah.
It's always great when "Isn't that terrible" can double with "Isn't that awesome?" Because really,
Yeah,
that
it's
really
true.
is awesome. Good for
Yeah,
him.
you're right. Isn't that awesome? Yeah.
All right, so this week we have a great guest. Lev Golinkin is a contributor to The Nation magazine and the author of A Backpack, a Bear, and 8 Crates of Vodka, a memoir of growing up in late Soviet-era Ukraine and coming to the U.S. as a refugee. Lev has done a lot of fantastic journalism on Ukraine, not just during this current crisis, but over the last 8 years, and really offering a debunking of so many of the prevailing narratives that we get in corporate media when it comes to Ukraine and the whole conflict there. So we're very excited to speak to Lev Golinkin.
So thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Very excited to have you on. You've been saying something that is not that complex, but it seems like a lot of people are incapable of having these two ideas in their head at the same time, which is that you have condemned the invasion, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and you also acknowledge that there are neo-Nazi elements in the Azov Battalion, which is part of the Ukrainian military. Are you surprised by how incapable people are of having those two ideas in their brains at the same time?
Yeah, I'm stunned by it, especially because we're at a point where everybody at the same time we're talking about the existential danger that white supremacy poses to the world. Okay, we're focusing so much on that while simultaneously we are actively going out of our way to whitewash and provide cover for a neo-Nazi battalion. I mean, it's like a town that says, you know, like fighting fires is so important. It is so important. Well, there's the middle of the town is on fire and everybody's ignoring it. It's just it's insanity.
And how is your experience as growing up in Ukraine? How did that inform your view of Azov and of this kind of white supremacy in general and how it's being whitewashed?
Well, I mean, Ukraine does have an anti-Semitic past. I certainly spent my childhood getting introduced to it in Kharkiv, which is actually where the city where Azov was formed out of. But the issue, I think, is not of its past or the fact that it's there. I mean, Ukraine is not an anti-Semitic country. I mean, if they were an anti-Semitic country, they wouldn't have elected Zelensky. They elected a Jewish president. The problem is not that Ukraine is anti-Semitic. The problem is that it has this element that is anti-Semitic in its nature, and that's far right. Okay, and it's not and Russia is trying to paint Ukraine as just a bunch of neo-Nazis, which they're not. The problem isn't Ukraine. The problem is the Azov Battalion. You know, there's a couple of other units that also have a far right past, but Azov has emerged to be the most successful one by far.
So how did Azov come to be so influential? I talk about how they began and who is behind them, who's funding them.
They began in end of 2013, 2014. The Maidan uprising needed street muscle. They needed people came out, they needed people to fight back against the police. And it wasn't going to be college students fighting back. They needed actual people who are ready to fight. And so these neo-Nazi gangs proved to be invaluable. They provided security to the Maidan. They became influential there. Then after the Maidan uprising and the war began with the separatists, Ukrainian army was decimated. I think they had like 6,000 people. I'm not about. It was just 2 decades of corruption, just utterly decimated the army. Okay, there was nothing. I mean, there were warehouses and bases that were supposed to be full of equipment that were just empty. So these people, the neo-Nazi groups, then formed these battalions. And they did what radicals always do. They were willing to fight, they were willing to kill, they were willing to die, and they were organized already due to their past. So Azov became the most influential one of us. They're extremely organized. They are very good with PR. Their leaders are excellent at managing, and they also are descended from partly from the Svoboda Party, which is a well-organized neo-Nazi party in Ukraine. So they've had this past. It used to be the Social Nationalist Party of Ukraine. Then it had a ultra-violent wing. That wing became the Patriot of Ukraine, neo-Nazi gang, and the Patriot of Ukraine is what formed the core of Azov. And just to show, I mean, how ready they were, they almost immediately started recruiting neo-Nazis from around the world. So they even as they were fighting, they were already thinking of turning themselves into a transnational core of white supremacy.
The killer in Christchurch who massacred all those worshipers at those two mosques, he claimed to have been inspired somewhat by Azov, or he mentioned Ukraine in some way. And then the killer in Buffalo, he then also claimed to be inspired by the killer in Christchurch. So, I mean, can we draw a link, do you think, between Azov and white supremacists, violent white supremacists globally?
Yes and no. The New Zealand killer did not mention Azov. He mentioned Ukraine, but he mentioned it in the context of several other countries. Okay, so there's nothing specific linking him to Azov. They both use the Sonnenrad, the black sun symbol, but that which is a very common neo-Nazi symbol. But again, that's like saying, we have no problem admitting that that's what it is with the New Zealand killer and the Buffalo killer. But when Azov freely uses it, we're like, oh, they're not neo-Nazis anymore. You know what I mean? It's maybe they're just using it in a different way. Maybe they're really, worshiping the sun, because it is an ancient sun symbol. But so the short answer is a direct link to Azov, no. But that's not the bigger issue. The bigger issue is white supremacy has undergone a transformation over the past 30 years or so. They no longer see themselves as nations fighting. Before it was, I mean, even if you consider the Nazis did not think that other fascists in Hungary and Ukraine, they didn't think that they were true Aryans. They just used them as lackeys. Then, the Nazis were concerned about themselves, about the true Aryans. They did not think of anybody else. So it was, Deutschland über alles, not white race über alles, but Deutschland über alles. Now it's fundamentally different. The white supremacists all over the world see themselves as part of the white race and their fight for survival against extinction, which that is not, when they talk about white genocide, that's not just a PR trick. That's an actual, they truly believe they're going to be exterminated. The founder of Azov, Andriy Beletsky, he believed that very much. And he even said the mission of his group, of his neo-Nazi gang, is to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against the Jew-led Untermenschen. Okay, so in a much larger scope, of course, Azov is tied to, I mean, there are no lone wolves. Like I say, it's a global wolf pack. All these people feel they're part of a larger movement, of a global struggle for the white race. And Ukraine has become a hotspot, one could say the hotspot for this struggle. Now, it's also very important to point out that the Russian separatist side also has strong neo-Nazi ties, and they do have neo-Nazis coming from around the world. For example, I think in 2017, I believe it was around there, a group of Swedish neo-Nazis that trained with the Russian-backed separatists bombed a refugee shelter in Sweden. So what you wind up having is neo-Nazis split based on how they view Russia. Some, like, for example, Richard Spencer, view Russia as a bastion, it's the last bastion of the white race, despite the fact that Russia has 11 million Muslims. Okay. Others, they view Russia as not even white, they view it as an Asiatic horde, and they see that countries of Central Europe being trapped between the liberal LGBTQ democracies of the West and the Asiatic hordes of Russia. So, but mostly though, that I found these people are, aside from the fact that they hate each other, they're pretty much indistinguishable. It's kind of like the Bloods and the Crips, like, where somebody winds up, they're both very similar. They just happen to be deathly rivals. So where somebody winds up on one side of the divide or the other is generally just based on whether just their networks so many times. Often and also if somebody's in Serbia, Serbia is historically aligned with Russia. So a Serbian neo-Nazi is much more likely to go to Russia. Now, a Croatian neo-Nazi is much more likely to join Ukraine. So what you have is within the Russian-Ukraine war, you have a mini Balkan civil war happening. It's the same thing. I mean, that's going far off field, but it's the same thing with Chechnya. You have the pro-Russian Chechens, and they formed groups and battalions for the separatists. And then you have the anti-Russian Chechens who hate the pro-Russian Chechens having a mini little civil war within the larger war.
One talking point you will hear, though, from people who minimize the presence of Azov inside the Ukrainian armed forces is that politically, far-right groups don't get very many votes inside Ukraine, and that Ukraine elected a Jewish president. So how can there be a problem with neo-Nazis in a situation where you have a Jewish president and far-right political parties getting such a small share of the votes? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, very easily. Those are two separate points, and it's very easy to refute both of them. For Ukraine, despite what Russia is trying to say, is not an anti-Semitic country. In fact, the fact that they voted for Zelensky, who's Jewish and who is openly Jewish, is incredible. They also had a Jewish prime minister. It's a wonderful, it's a great thing. It's such a turnaround from the dark past that Ukraine had, and I think that's fantastic. Okay, and Ukraine also has a thriving Muslim population as well. So you have it's a very diverse society. That said, America elected Barack Obama, and saying that because Ukraine elected a Jewish president, they cannot have a neo-Nazi element, that's like saying that America elected Barack Obama, which ended racism. So then why are we talking about Buffalo shootings? Why are we talking about Charlottesville? Why are we talking about any of that? Barack Obama ended racism. How can we have a black president and racism? So that's just nonsensical. The second argument is that the far right do not do well in the polls. That's correct. They do not do well in the polls, but they're not interested in the polls. They have their action is through violence. They have carte blanche to recruit neo-Nazis around the world. You could say, again, if you're looking at politics, you could say that, the Buffalo, the alleged shooter in Buffalo and the shooter in El Paso and the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter, none of them stood a chance at being elected mayor of any American town. So just because they didn't do well in the polls doesn't make them safe. It's like any justification that the American think tank and media establishment use to whitewash Azov will crumble at the merest examination of it, just like these.
And what are some of the worst examples of this whitewashing? I know it's probably hard to whittle them down because there's so many, but
they are. My God, this war has been manna from heaven for them. Okay, we have the BBC started saying, the BBC was one of the first groups to actually cover Azov in the beginning, and laudably they actually covered it, and they not only covered it, but they covered how they're attracting neo-Nazis from around the world. It was one of the first. I still remember seeing it. Was amazing. Now the BBC is saying that Azov is not neo-Nazi, and it's actually Russian lies. So it's at this point, it's like the Onion would think that it's a little too much on the nose. It's the BBC is saying that the BBC is lying. Okay, USA Today had a story. It had a pretty blunt headline. It said something like, Ukrainian nationalist battalion contains Nazis. Okay, and it has a guy the correspondent went and talked to them, saw swastikas, talked to people who said things like, "I am a Nazi." Okay. And now the USA Today is doing a fact check about, does the Azov battalion have Nazi roots and things like that. I'm paraphrasing here, but and the Ukrainian battalion may have some neo-Nazi past, but really, what is it now? As if somehow this battalion that magically that somehow became non-neo-Nazi, and I was just talking right before this. I was just talking with somebody who's an editor at a major publication, a very smart person, and they asked, are you sure they're still neo-Nazi? And I'm like, okay, David Duke has left the Ku Klux Klan a long, long time ago. David Duke, and I'm not joking, says that he is a human rights activist. That is how he portrayed himself in an interview about, I don't know, 2 years ago. Richard Spencer also said he's not neo-Nazi, he's not far right. Okay. Could you imagine a newspaper actually giving this credence? Could you imagine like an editor being like, but is David Duke really still racist? Have that changed at all? And here we have a battalion with, by the way, it's not just the problem with Azov is not just the neo-Nazi nature. It's the fact that it also has a giant track record of war crimes, of torture, of execution, of just everything you can imagine. Okay. And that's not my documentation. That's documented by Amnesty International and the United Nations in multiple reports. And they also have a subpar little brown shirt unit, a street patrol unit that distinguished itself upon being formed. They were formed in 2018 and immediately distinguished themselves by going after Ukraine's Roma and carrying out pogroms of them. So, and that's an important thing to remember, that when we're talking about whitewashing this unit, this isn't just a bunch of drunkards sitting around. This isn't the neo-Nazis at Charlottesville with polo shirts. This isn't people like Richard Spencer. And those can be deadly, considering those that somebody killed at Charlottesville. But compared to this, I mean, this is a group that has a track record of war crimes. This is a group that has destroyed people in Donbass. This is not heroes, and this is people who have an impact. Okay, this is people who have blood on their hands, and we're just whitewashing them. And you could just look across newspapers. You could just look, and it's just all of a sudden it's like this battalion. Just now they said, DW, one of the major outlets in Europe. I'm looking at it here. It says, Azov regiment is accused of having neo-Nazi past. I mean, at this point, they're not even saying that they changed. They're not even saying they were in the neo-Nazis and they stopped. They're saying, we don't even know if they have a neo-Nazi past. Perhaps they were a knitting club that took up arms. We don't know. Okay, so this is all happening at the same time as all of these media outlets are squealing about how white supremacy is an existential threat. And yet they're actively going out of their way to give cover to this organization that trains and recruits white supremacists all over the world. And the other example that I was going to say, and this is a very, very important example, Facebook. I just got confirmation from Facebook that they have retained their policy on Azov. Here's what wound up happening. Facebook banned Azov's page, okay, as extremist. Then in February, they lifted they not only had Azov banned, but they had posts praising Azov banned. In other words, you cannot post the Azov battalion is amazing, I love the Azov battalion. That would get blocked because Facebook recognized them as a neo-Nazi group, as an extremist group. In February, they lifted that part of the ban. They said that you can now praise them only provided it's in the context of defending Ukraine. I spoke with Facebook yesterday, and I said, have they lifted the ban? And they said, no, nothing has changed after Buffalo. So just wrap your mind around this, okay? Facebook has had an entire campaign based around how it promotes white supremacy, okay? And here they are, not only this is not them ignoring something. This is not them turning a blind eye. This is them taking action. This is them proactively. This is them saying, we know who these people are, and we're going to allow you to praise them anyway. Okay? This is them proudly taking action on this. Okay? And think about this. We're not talking about there's a ban on Ukraine. You can praise Ukraine, and I think Ukrainian defenders are being extremely brave. And I mean, I think I'm from Kharkiv, from Eastern Ukraine, that's getting destroyed right now. And I mean, I think the people that are going through hell, I think the world should be united about them. Why is it necessary to praise this unit? couldn't they just praise Ukrainian armed forces or any other non-neo-Nazi units? Why did Facebook have to proactively say that we're allowed to praise them? Why couldn't we just praise Ukraine? Okay, this is how sickening this is. This is from the same group that says, "Oh, we worry about neo-Nazism." This is from the same people that say that every time Tucker Carlson sneezes, it's the second coming of Hitler. Okay, and yet they will go out of their way to actually say, "You know what? You can praise these neo-Nazis. We know they're neo-Nazis. We're fully aware of that. But provided you say they're being great in defending Ukraine." Okay, if this was the 1980s, they would be doing this with Osama bin Laden and the founding members of the Taliban and Al Qaeda. We know they're a little extreme, but you can praise them so long as it's in the context of fighting for Afghanistan. Okay, this is what we do. We would be having hashtag bin Laden, okay, on Twitter. We'd be having Western media weeping with joy at the resilience and the bravery of the founding members of Taliban and Al Qaeda.
I wanted to ask you also about the Stepan Bandera.
Sure.
Because as we've covered on the show, there was that Ukrainian mayor who had his photo in the background, which no one thought to ask him to remove the photo or anything, the portrait.
Why would they?
Yeah, exactly. So I've heard people say, "Oh, he wasn't a Nazi because he was in a Nazi concentration camp." What's your response to that?
He was a Nazi collaborator and a fascist. That's who he was. Yes, at one point, the Nazis had enough of them because the Nazis didn't even trust them, and they imprisoned him in a concentration camp. Then they promptly let him out, and so that's that. I mean, listen, there were many times when the Nazis would turn on their lackeys. There were times when they would turn on them and execute them. Okay, because Stepan Bandera was interested in turning Ukraine into a fascist state, while the Nazis couldn't care less about that, and they just wanted to turn Ukraine into a giant farmhouse for Germany. I'll put it this way: saying that Stepan Bandera was not a Nazi collaborator, you might as well say that Eichmann didn't participate in the Holocaust. Okay, Stepan Bandera was a fascist through and through. His vision of Ukraine was a Ukraine freed of Russians, Jews, and Poles. And him and his men have done everything in their power to liquidate these people. Okay? His organization was thoroughly anti-Semitic. It was one of the cornerstones of their entire existence. Okay? He did not ally himself with Germany out of convenience. Even if he did, that would not have been. It's like, well, okay, so give me the reason. You might have been fought for Hitler, but your heart wasn't in it. Okay, but that wasn't even the case. The only difference between them and the Nazis was that the Nazis thought that they were subpar garbage, and Stepan Bandera thought that Ukraine was God's gift to the world, and the Ubermensch. Okay. That's the only difference. He was a Nazi collaborator. Every Holocaust organization, the U.S. Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Museum, Holocaust scholars, everybody will say that. Saying he's not, and again, this has repercussions. His men massacred tens of thousands of Jews and 70,000 to 100,000 Poles in the most vicious way possible. I mean, I'm talking about in ways that would make Hannibal Lecter think it's a bit excessive. It was just, it's brutal what they did to Poland, okay? They didn't want to use bullets, so they just hand by hand exterminated villages, okay? And the fact that that Ukraine is whitewashing them is disgusting. And Zelensky has not been helpful on this. Before, when he was right around the time of the presidential election, he said, well, some in Ukraine worship Stepan, but, they idolize Stepan Bandera, and that's cool. I mean, can you imagine like Obama being like, some in America idolize the Confederacy, and that's cool. Different strokes for different folks. Okay. And this is what Zelensky, who says he lost people in the Holocaust, and that's what he said. It's insane and this is happening across Ukraine. He's become idolized. And it's especially painful to people from Eastern Ukraine who have fought, who have the vast majority of Ukraine fought against the Nazis. Okay, and here you have these people who worship these guys, and they're putting up their statues in places where, I mean, we're talking about like 420,000 Americans died in World War II total. Okay, something like 270,000 Ukrainians died in a battle for Kharkiv. In one battle for my city, one battle. There were 4 battles of Kharkiv. Okay, so this is the land was the Nazis were defeated in blood, and now you have this small group that does not speak for all Ukrainians imposing their heroes on the rest of the land. I mean, it's you know, we have problem with Confederate statues now, but this is taking it to a different degree. This would be starting to put Robert E. Lee statues all over America, okay, and saying all of America loves it, and suddenly Western media would be like, well, Robert Lee wasn't that bad. So it's I mean, Stepan Bandera was a Nazi collaborator. Stepan Bandera and his men were Holocaust perpetrators. The fact that the Nazis at one point got tired of him and jailed him doesn't really say much. It just says that the Nazis really didn't care for them at all, which is the Nazis used them to do their dirty work, like murder infants and do concentration camp guards. The Nazis were smart. They just used them as lackeys. That was it.
And it's consistent with their views, the Nazi views, right? Like they didn't consider Ukrainians their equals.
Oh no, they're going to starve them. I mean, and they did starve so many Ukrainians. And the other thing, you reminded me of something. One thing that often gets lost is one of the biggest targets of Bandera and his men were just ethnic Ukrainians too, because they killed anybody who didn't agree with them. So in addition to murdering Jews, Poles, they massacred any Ukrainian too who they thought was against them.
And then the president, Viktor Yushchenko, declared Bandera a hero.
Yes.
Did that surprise you?
No.
No, okay.
Not at all. I mean, to them, he's a hero. And it's like I said, he's not a tragic figure. They say he's a freedom fighter, and he was a freedom fighter. It's true. But once again, everybody's a freedom fighter. Everybody fights for something. There's no real like actual jokers that much in history and in the world. Everybody's fighting for a cause. His cause just happened to be a Ukraine that was ethnically cleansed of anybody who was not ethnic Ukrainian and who did not believe in the fascism of Bandera.
When it comes to Zelensky, he was elected in 2019 on a mandate of peace. Is it fair to say that he was intimidated by followers of Bandera and other far-right groups into not making peace with Russia? Because he has faced threats of both being overthrown and even of death from some far-right leaders.
Well, it's very hard for me, and he has shown a lot of bravery, and it's very hard for me to say what he's thinking. So I'll just give an example, a small example of what happened. Shortly after being elected, a Ukrainian station decided to do something called the Telemost, okay? It's a show in which they would have people from Russia and people from Ukraine talking to each other on TV, just everyday people talking about their issues. It's a very symbolic thing for the people who know the history, because in the 1980s, they did this between Phil Donahue did this with Vladimir Pozner in the Soviet Union, and it was seen as a big step towards peace, towards reducing tensions. When they had people in America, people in Moscow talk about their issues. And I remember it was I was a kid, but it was just a huge deal. Everybody saw this. So this television station was going to do this. Andrei Beletsky, the neo-Nazi who was in charge of Azov and who formed Azov, he put out a short video telling Zelensky that if this program wasn't canceled, they were going to the next conversation was going to take place in Zelensky's office. Okay, within like an hour of that video, it was announced that the program was canceled. Okay, now this is like, I mean, what kind of a place do you have where somebody can just openly threaten the president, and the president and the demands are immediately met? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much Zelensky has tried to push back against them, because I have a feeling if he did, we would know about it. I really have no, I don't want to speak for him. Like I said, I'm telling you his actions and his words. And I don't know what would happen if he tried to get them to cross the street and they didn't want to cross the street. I don't know. But it's certainly, so far, the far right has just had, they've acted with impunity when it comes to one of it. On the rare occasions, one of them is charged with murder, for example. They would just storm the courtroom and they would make sure that nothing happened. And none of that was pushed back on. Which is, again, like, why would they need to have election power? They have the power to override things with violence. They don't need election.
As we're speaking, the Senate has passed a measure approving $40 billion more dollars for the proxy war in Ukraine. Most of that will go to weapons contractors. Your comment on what impact this will have on the war and the fact that no Democrats voted against this measure. Every single Democrat in both houses of Congress, the House and the Senate, voted to approve this $40 billion measure.
Not to mention that people in think tanks that are funded by weapons manufacturers, do not get identified as having a conflict of interest when they're interviewed. They're just shown as partial observers.
Yes.
And we have major think tanks that are just you can just look them up and you can see that they're funded by weapons manufacturers. I'm very torn on this. I mean, I think the U.S. should aid Ukraine. I hate to say it, but I mean, usually I don't like the idea of introducing weapons to a conflict, but it's just, my heart just goes out to the people there, and I want them to be able to defend themselves. At the same time, the overarching danger is that these weapons will begin to flood into Europe, into the rest of Europe. That is not, I mean, you have to understand that prior to the war, Ukraine was already one of the top arms exporters in the world, especially Eastern Ukraine, my region, my city, and others. They were the hubs of Soviet arms manufacturing. So all of these weapons, the reason why the Ukrainian army, I was saying before, the Ukrainian army was decimated by corruption. There would be warehouses and bases that were supposed to have tanks and they didn't. Those tanks didn't just vanish. Those tanks were sold. Okay. So you are going to have military grade weapons flooding into Europe, and it's going to be impossible to keep them in Ukraine. And this is I say this, somebody who supports Ukraine, who thinks we should be backing them, but we are going to see this. We are going to see military grade weapons wind up in Western Europe. That is exactly what's going to happen. I also find it very interesting that just as Americans were getting sick of the war in Afghanistan, and just as all of these weapons and all of this money was, our nation building was coming to an end, suddenly, like I said, this war does benefit people. It is a horrible war. It is a war crime by Russia to commit it. But weapons manufacturers should be sending thank you notes to Moscow. Because, all of a sudden, you now have nice white people who are relatable to Americans, who people can rally behind, and who they can say we're once again emerged in nation building. And I also want to point out, they say this is a proxy war. This was a proxy war from the beginning, okay, where Russia supported, without a doubt, the rebels would have collapsed, would have been snuffed out without aid by Russia. Russia gave them weapons, Russia gave them training, Russia gave them money, Russia sent in troops and soldiers to help them. That is without a doubt. Just like, without a doubt, the Ukrainian government would have collapsed without the aid that it was given by America when it was on the brink of collapse in 2014, 2015. And American politicians went and joined the Ukrainian protesters when they were rising up against Yanukovych in 2013, 2014. Now, this was like, Senator McCain, Senator Chris Murphy. Imagine if Putin sent people to join the January 6th protest, the January 6th uprising. Imagine if he sent a dog catcher from the smallest Russian city imaginable to go there and say, "We are with you." It would be seen as an act of war. It would be, and here we're doing it, and it's no problem. So from the beginning, this was a proxy war, and the people who got screwed the most, people who got destroyed in this, are the people of Eastern Ukraine, the people of Donbass, who have much more in common with Ohio and Western Pennsylvania than they do with Washington or Moscow or Kiev. These people who just wanted to be left alone, these coal miners, steel workers, they're decent people. They didn't have a problem with anybody. These are not the types of people who thought about NATO or Russian economy. These are the types of people who thought about working and spending the nights and weekends with their families. I mean, it's the most tragic part of this is that the people who got this, they just wanted nothing to do with it. They're just caught in the middle, and both sides have just committed horrors against them. And throughout for 8 years, it's just been, I follow Russian media and I follow American and Western media, and it's like both sides are simultaneously weeping about the horrible things happening to the people of Donbass while they're committing horrible things against the people of Donbass. And I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen it in so many other wars and so many other places, but it's just, it sounds cliche, but I mean, it's different when it's like when you speak the languages, when you know when it's just happening, you just see, it just hits you different.
Do you think that the arms industry, have they undermined diplomacy on the part of the United States?
I view it as conflicts of interest exist no matter what. They can't unexist. A judge that, for example, judges over their son's speeding ticket automatically has a conflict of interest. The judge doesn't have to, the judge could be fair and impartial, they automatically have a conflict of interest, okay? The weapons manufacturer is interested in manufacturing weapons, okay? It is impossible just logically to say that weapons manufacturers are going to be pushing for peace. They are a business, okay? That's like saying that Dunkin' Donuts would be involved in efforts to not sell donuts, okay? I mean, that kind of goes against the business model. And again, this is just basic gaslighting. I mean, like, why would they be anti-war? And the thing is, like, also, it's like they're doing their job, okay? This is what they do. This is the business they're in. They're doing their job. The people who are not doing their job are people in the media and politics who are not calling out people who lobby for the defense industry. So what you see all the time, and this is an entirely different topic, of course, but what you see all the time is they'll have somebody who's say, Professor Smith used to work in the defense, department and is now chairman of Professor Smith's strategies. Okay, and what they don't see is that these people are lobbyists.
Yeah, Raytheon or.
Yeah, and you know what else too? Have you ever tried looking at the lobbyist database? Have you tried researching it, Aaron? Have you?
Yeah, not recently, but yeah, I have.
Okay, it makes like a 1996 library computer look efficient. Okay, it's as if it was designed. Like, I've searched for people who I know were in there and I couldn't find them. Okay, it's almost as if it's designed to make it very, very difficult to find. So even if an editor or a producer wanted to look somebody up, they couldn't. Not to mention the fact that, I mean, like, almost nobody is prosecuted for this, so there's really no incentive for people to list themselves. So it's just, I mean, you just have people who just have blatant, and we're talking about fake news, right? So we're talking about this fake news. So how can you not present somebody and say that they have a blatant conflict of interest when it comes to, and again, this is ramifications. This says, these weapons are just theoretical. Yes, I very much think that the defense industry would not be for peace, and I think they would not be doing their job if they were, I mean, if I start seeing Raytheon be involved in peace negotiations, I'd be like, "What? Are you sure you guys want to do this? Because I'm kind of worried. Like,
right.
You're off task."
But I guess the question is also, what could the United States government be doing that would actually further peace, as opposed to just kind of doing the bidding of the arms industry? Like, are there certain things that they're not pursuing because of that?
This is not an answer that most experts would come up with some bullshit reason right now. And the only way out of this is through blood. Okay, this is the continuation of a war that's been happening for over 100 years. This is not really anything new. There are people who are interested in both sides of the war continuing. Okay, there's no way that Putin will end this war. Okay, his entire reputation, everything, the worldview that he has constructed depends solely on this. He's not going to say, he cannot stop this. Okay, because he has staked so much on this that he must go through with it. And in the process, he has unified all of Ukraine, including Eastern Ukraine, which had ties with Russia. He has unified all of Ukraine against himself. The point of no return was 2014. I mean, that was when when Yanukovych was overthrown, when the separatists shows up, and most importantly, when the battalions, when these neo-Nazi groups were allowed to form armed paramilitaries. I mean, that was there are people on both sides of this war who are super interested in continuing, who are invested in continuing. So I could come up with a bullshit answer, but honestly, I mean, at this point, even if the United States wanted to stop this, what are they gonna? You know what I mean? What are they gonna do? You know.
But Lev, I guess my point is, why not try? Because from where I sit, there's been no serious effort at diplomacy, and there are all these reports of, for example, Boris Johnson going to Zelensky and saying, don't negotiate. So it does seem like there's been a lot of pressure on Zelensky not to engage in talks. And of course, it's quite possible Putin won't accept anything except total victory, however he defines it. But why not try steps like, Russia's demand was that Ukraine pledge neutrality, not to join NATO, and then coming up with some sort of agreement that acknowledges that parts of Ukraine are not going to go back to Ukraine, especially Crimea. And then you have areas of the Donbass. I mean, you say that the Eastern Ukraine is united against Russia, but aren't there parts of the Donbass that don't want to live under the Kiev government? Or is that just Russian propaganda?
I'm very careful with saying this because I want to speak for the people. I mean, it's clear that the people in like my city, for example, Odessa, are just very against Russia. And I mean, and it's a very logical thing. It's a very reasonable thing. When somebody's bombing you, you're not going to be inclined to be friends with them. The people who are stuck in the rebel-held territories, they have it the worst. I really don't know what to say about what they want. I don't. The area has turned for a long time into this Mad Max apocalyptic hell. I don't know what they would want. I think I would surmise that a lot of them, I mean, look at it this way. Russia took over Crimea without a shot being fired, okay? These people rose up, and I think it's safe to assume that they thought that they would be able to just join with Russia. They would say, we do not recognize the new Ukrainian government. You have overthrown an elected president. Yanukovych was our president. He was fairly elected. You have overthrown him. We now no longer want to have anything to do with you. I think these people very much thought that what would happen is what happened in Crimea, which is a bloodless transfer. They didn't get that. They got hell instead. They got horror. They got crimes. I mean, the body count from this conflict is ludicrously undercounted. I would say that a whole lot of them feel betrayed by both sides. And if there's one thing that's become abundantly clear is that neither side gives a fuck about the people on the ground there. Not Russia, who sent in psychopaths to rule them, and certainly not Ukraine, which shelled and tortured them as well. So I don't know what they want, but I think what they want is to not be killed. I think that's about the only thing I can say for them. So, and as far as peace talks, I mean, like I said, we should have some sort of peace talks, but honestly, I mean, there are so many parties on both sides who have weapons and who it's I mean, I'm not a scholar of history, but it almost seems to me like, the old saying how right before World War I, nobody wanted war and war was inevitable. This has been said since 100 years ago, and it's just been continued. The last battles of World War II really didn't end until 1955, okay? Because the last battles were the Western Ukrainian, the Bandera folks, who held out against the Soviet Union till around 1955. For 10 years, they managed to wage a guerrilla war against the USSR. in Western Ukraine, which is just designed for guerrilla warfare. And so this is so much of this is unfinished business on so many sides. From the diaspora who fled, from the Stepan Bandera fans who fled and who made their way to Canada and America and the UK and Australia and have spent years and years and years nursing this and planning and inciting things, to Russia and to Putin building his entire thing on the notion of reestablishing a Russian empire. I really don't. I hope they talk for peace, but I mean, at this point, I don't see any other way of this happening other than through blood.
On a lighter note, I'm not sure how to transition out of this, but Nina Jankowicz, you of course wrote a piece about the Ministry of what is it? The Disinformation
Ministry
Czar.
of Truth.
Ministry of Truth, yeah. Is it? And we were excited to ask you about it, and maybe your piece on her is what helped bring it down, because they had to disband.
They actually didn't. They paused it. I think
they paused it. Okay. Oh,
yeah,
thank
and
God.
I think that's they paused it. And I think that's actually something that I think we should look out for, and I think we should commit ourselves to not pausing it, but just plowing it over with salt. But they did pause it, and they're saying, the problem was the rollout and the way that it was introduced, and now that people are saying, oh, it's because Nina was attacked by people. But honestly, I mean, I'm very happy that she's. People said she was a buffoon. I didn't think she was a buffoon. I thought she was somebody who was pretty dangerous. I think censors a lot of times come at you with smiles, and they come at you. No censor in the history of censorship has ever come at you at anything other than smiles and expressions that they want to help you and protect you. Every censor has always done that. I think her ideas were dangerous. I think her track record with working with Ukraine to whitewash battalions, including Azov, to whitewash them as mere volunteers who are helping Ukraine. I think that says quite a lot about her.
We have a clip of that, so let's go to it. This is back when Nina Jankowicz was working for something called Stop Fake, which is essentially a U.S. government-funded propaganda operation. And that's basically what it is.
She was working with them. I'm not sure if she was. I don't think she was on the payroll, but she was working with them.
Okay. Yeah. Well, here she is on video. Here she is on video.
Yeah. I'm just trying to be as accurate as possible.
Yeah.
And we appreciate it. But here she is on video, doing what you're talking about, working with Stop Fake in this propaganda video, essentially whitewashing Azov neo-Nazis inside of Ukraine.
When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 and Russian-supported militants launched an armed conflict in the industrial Donbass region, the Ukrainian army was completely decimated, with an insignificant number of poorly equipped, battle-ready troops. Volunteer battalions organized throughout the country.
So, Lev, maybe talk to us about the various volunteer group insignias that we're seeing there, and that she's promoting here as the volunteers of Ukraine.
Yeah. Azov is only, I mean, it's the most, it's the most famous one, but there's, if you start at the top at the red there, that's Azov, and that's a neo-Nazi symbol right there, the sword with the N thing going through it. That's a wolf's angle, that's a wolf's hook rune. It's used by neo-Nazis all over the world, including the Aryan Nation, one of the premier neo-Nazi gangs in America. Now bear in mind, this is 2017. By this point, every single one of these 4 battalions, which is Donbass, Dnipro 1, Aidar, and Azov, every single one of them had a long track record of war crimes that have been documented by Amnesty, by Human Rights Watch, and by the United Nations. 2 of these battalions, for example, the one at the left and the one at the bottom, for example, they got caught. They were blocking food to entire regions in the Donbass. So they were actively in the middle of winter. They were blocking food, which Amnesty said it's a war crime, because what they're saying basically is anybody in this region, all the civilians, anybody who couldn't even get out, fuck them. That's what they were saying. They were committing war crimes. All of these battalions were reported with torture. They were reported with kidnappings, with disappearances, with executions. And this is by 2017. So here's Jankowicz with who says she's fighting disinformation. Okay, and this is somebody who's presenting these people, and so she's presenting them as mere volunteers. Okay, it's just good people who took up arms, patriots who took up arms. Okay, and again, it's nobody forced her to make this segment. Nobody forced her to focus on these battalions. She can't even claim ignorance. Because she tweeted out this segment after it was aired. She proudly tweeted it out. So she can't even claim that, somebody in the control room then threw up this wrong picture of battalions. Okay. And she also showed photographs of these battalions. So this is exactly what she's talking about. Okay. So this is whitewashing violent far-right groups, which all of these also have far-right ties. Azov just happened to be the most in your face about it, and presenting them as nothing more than volunteers. Okay, and this whole thing is claiming to debunk Russian lies, and the Russian lies is that these battalions are war criminals. Of course, what Moscow is not doing it because it cares about war crimes. Moscow is using them for propaganda, but in response, she's basically saying, "Oh no, these people are good."
Armed forces and prevented further Russian separatist encroachment. Today, the volunteer battalions are part of the official Ukrainian armed forces, overseen by the Defense and Interior ministries. The volunteer movement in Ukraine extends far beyond military service. Volunteer groups are active in supporting Ukraine's military with food, clothing, medicine, and post-battle rehabilitation, as well as working actively with the nearly 2 million internal refugees displaced by the war in Ukraine.
This is a segment in which she covers battalions that committed war crimes against the people of Ukraine, that purposefully starved the people in Donbass. And by this point, the only people who are left there are the people who are too sick, too old, too poor to be able to get out. Okay, the most vulnerable people. And in this segment, they talk about how these battalions are actively working with the people of Eastern Ukraine. Okay, that's going above and beyond sick. That's like flashing a photo of Harvey Weinstein, during a segment on feminist allies. That is just and again, nobody forced them to do this. Nobody forced them to do this. They could have just, they could have disproven the law of things. They could have talked about how, Ukraine has made giant strides fighting anti-Semitism or anything. They could have very easily debunked Russian propaganda by focusing on the truth. Okay, and this is this person's experience. This is American-funded propaganda machine. And I'll tell you this: soon, Stop Fake, which is the group that you worked for, started going off the rails, as these groups often do. They started whitewashing gangs that even the United States State Department admits are nationalist hate groups. So here we have an organization that was celebrated across Western media, okay? It was celebrated as these pioneers in debunking Russian propaganda, that was funded by George Soros's organization, by the British government, and by the US government, okay? And by the Czech government too. This is a group that was celebrated and lauded, and within a couple of years, they went so off the rails that they started whitewashing groups that even America admits are neo-Nazis. They're now one of the two partners of Facebook for fact checking. This group now, to this day, this group that whitewashed neo-Nazis and has an extended record of it, is one of the fact checkers. So I guess technically, if the United States State Department were to say that C-14, which is one of the neo-Nazi gangs that organizes a hate group, technically, I guess this group that was started by the United States, that was funded by the United States, would theoretically declare them to be fake news. Crazy. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I'm really glad you added more, because that's so important. And it speaks to how insane it is to have the idea of a disinformation board put up by the government. All the more so if you have someone who has spread outright disinformation, whitewashing neo-Nazi groups. And what bothers me, Lev, is that the conversation around Nina Jankowicz and the Disinformation Governance Board that we saw in the corporate media, the range of discussion there is so narrow that the points you've made in your great article in The Nation magazine were totally excluded. The right-wing media focused on the fact that Jankowicz is a partisan. She's a partisan Democrat. That's true. And that she's kooky, the Mary Poppins video, all that stuff. But this is the most, I think, insidious aspect of all this. Her own role, not just in spreading disinformation, but in spreading disinformation that whitewashes armed neo-Nazis. And that part of it plays no role in the conversation. And it's too bad.
Well, and overall, honestly, I mean, discussing like who should lead the Disinformation Board is a bit like discussing whether arsenic is best served with garnish or without. Okay, it fundamentally fails to address the problem in general. It really doesn't matter who heads this board. The problem is this board shouldn't exist. I'd say it's un-American, except we had the McCarthy era, so. But I mean, and I'll tell you this, it's the poison that such things spread, the distrust that people would have. Okay, like, instead of having a disinformation board, the easiest thing to do would be to, I don't know, have news start not spreading disinformation and have people start trusting the news again with good reason. I mean, just the very idea that of this disinformation board is just so awful, and I can't think of a better way to just continue chipping away at America.
On this issue of whitewashing of the Azov Battalion, I wanted to play for you an exchange I recently had on CGTN, a show called The Heat, and it was with a retired British Army colonel named Glenn Grant, who served as a former advisor to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, and we had this exchange about the Ukraine proxy war, and specifically the role of the Azov Battalion. And this guy, Glenn Grant, he denied that Azov is neo-Nazi. So I wanted to play the clip and get your response.
The weapons that are going in, trust me, the people are waiting for them with open arms to actually to fight Russia. So they're not weapons. You can't start sliding around armored vehicles or anti-tank weapons. They're going to the right places, and they're being used. Yeah. And NATO doesn't need to follow them, because I promise you that the general staff of the Ukraine is following it hard.
Okay.
Can I say quickly that in Syria, when the U.S. delivered anti-tank weapons, they ended up in the hands of Al-Qaeda. So I don't accept the premise that
we're not
these
Al-Qaeda.
weapons will be
talking about Al-Qaeda. We're talking about Ukraine, which is fighting for its very survival. And they need every single thing they can get. They're not going to give
them. Which also includes neo-Nazis, which is incorporated into.
No, it doesn't include neo-Nazis, sir. I'm sorry. This is a complete.
Are you denying that the Azov Battalion is neo-Nazis?
Yes, of course I'm denying it. I know them. These are just normal bloody people. I'm sorry.
Well, the U.S. Congress.
You've fallen for the Russians. Yes, Congress fell for the Russians. Congress fell for the Russian strategic communications as well as everybody else did.
Oh, so the Congress was hoodwinked by Russian. That's a new
normal battalion.
Yeah,
it's a normal battalion. No more, no less than any battalion that there is in America.
Well, if you ask people in the Donbass whether or not they think Azov are Nazis, I think you'd hear a much different.
People in the Donbass don't know anything about it.
I know plenty of Ukrainians who don't agree with you.
Look, Azov Battalion have been in Mariupol for 8 years. There's been no war in Mariupol. They have defended Mariupol for 8 years. Nobody's jumped into Mariupol, and no press have been able to go in there. The press have been allowed in there freely and have met Azov Battalion, and none of them have reported anything back.
There are Mariupol residents who would disagree with you that the things have been nice under the rule of neo-Nazis, and they're out there. So, Lev, your response to that? He says a lot of things. He says Azov is not neo-Nazi. He describes them as normal, bloody people, and he says that their rule in Mariupol was pretty peachy for the people there, that there weren't any problems, and that Congress, in banning U.S. military support to Azov, that they were essentially duped by Russian propaganda.
I mean, I would need an entire essay to like go point by point. Okay, one thing, I'll start with one interesting thing. When you mentioned Syria, and he was like, "Oh no, but this is Ukraine. It's you can trust them." Okay, so these are the trustworthy white people. So I get it. Pouring weapons, Syria, totally different. These people are totally good with them. He said things like, "I promise you." Like, what the hell do his promises mean? What is the promise? What is the promise of this guy mean? What water does it hold? Nothing. I mean, he is saying that the press went in and met the Azov Battalion and said that we're fine. Okay, he's either lying or he has never read a Western media account of the press. The Azov Battalion has been described as neo-Nazi, in the beginning of this war by the BBC, Telegraph, The Guardian, The New York Times, The Washington Post, The Nation by me, The Forward, pretty much all the main Time magazine, okay? So what he's saying is a lie. It is not true. The Western media met with Azov fighters and wrote stories like Ukrainian unit contains Nazis. Okay, that's what Western media wrote. So what he's saying is a lie. Okay, let's call it disinformation what it is. Okay, so that's number one. He says that Congress was fooled by Russian propaganda. The person who started this was John Conyers. Okay, which is interesting because John Conyers was a friend with and worked with in the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King. He worked with Rosa Parks. He employed Rosa Parks for a long time. And the interesting part is that the smear that the FBI used to intimidate, harass, and wiretap Martin Luther King was that he was a Soviet proxy. Okay, and there's a very long history of Soviets duping and using African Americans as for their nefarious goals, which is just pure racism, and which once again had a long and dirty history and resulted in people being hurt. Okay, so saying that John Conyers was bamboozled by Russian propaganda, okay, I mean it certainly has a very, whether he intended it or not, it has a pretty dark history of saying this. Okay, when he talked about, let's see, I'm just writing. It's like, where do I start here? Also, Jewish organizations. Okay, World Jewish Congress, the ADL, Simon Wiesenthal Center. Okay, they have all been on record as saying that these groups, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, actually helped break up Azov raising awareness of themselves, recruiting in France. The Simon Wiesenthal Center actually helped stop an Azov rally in France. Okay, so once again, this guy, this colonel, is he saying that the Jewish organizations have been fooled by Russian propaganda? Because honestly, that's one of the oldest anti-Semitic tropes too. The Jews are doing Russian bidding. The Judea Bolshevik. Not only is he spreading garbage, but he's doing it with enthusiasm and with things like "I promise you." Okay, and the most disgusting part is when he talks about when he feels the need to talk about on behalf of the people on Donbass. He doesn't get to talk on behalf of them. Okay, I'm Eastern Ukrainian. I don't talk on behalf of them. Okay, he sure doesn't get to talk on behalf of them. Okay, and when I hope they would have challenged him when they said. I mean, when he says that Western media met them and found nothing wrong, that is a lie. Okay, they have found something wrong over and over and over and over. So either all of these people are working and fooled by Russian propaganda, or this guy really is covering for neo-Nazis.
And let's go with the latter.
The problem is, unfortunately, that these things don't result in people being called out. These things don't result in people failing. These people only fail up.
Right.
Okay, as you know so well.
I'm sure Nina Jankowicz will, for example, land on her feet just fine after the dismantling of, or after she was forced to leave the Disinformation Board. I'm sure she'll maybe even get a show on MSNBC or something.
She'll be fighting disinformation, I'm sure.
That was a terrible segment, but you did a great job, Aaron.
That was wow.
Thanks.
But you know what? It's interesting because it's a good example of how you defend the indefensible. Okay? All he basically did is say, Russian proxy, Russian propaganda, Russian talking points, believe me, trust me, believe me. In any normal debate, everything he said could just be dismantled super easily. Okay?
Yeah.
So when you defend the indefensible, the only thing you can do is accuse others of being in Putin's pocket.
Right.
Absolutely.
If you talk about racism, right? Like I heard you say in another interview, racism is something that Russia, or historically and now, will jump on, right? The racism in the United States. So if you talk about racism in the United States, you're doing Putin's bidding.
Exactly. Russia is obsessed with racism in America. Okay, and part of it is for strategic reasons too, because don't forget, the Soviet Union competed with America for a legions of countries in Africa and South and Latin America, for example, and Asia. Okay, so of course it was in their best interest to portray Americans as capitalist colonialists who don't care about, who are racist, so that they can form alliances with these nations. And Russia is doing the exact same thing now. Okay. So I mean, based on this logic, right, anybody who mentions shootings, Russia loves cop shootings. My God, it's like they can't get enough of them. Okay, anything with like racial tensions in America, they cannot get enough of it. Okay, so according to this logic, right, we should not talk about any of this. Any racism in America just plays into Putin's hands. See how dumb that is?
Right. And they do it all the time. They use that argument all the time with other things, not with the racism stuff, but it's the same metric. If you're applying that metric, then that's the inevitable takeaway.
But the problem is we don't have people like Aaron and you who just provide the tiniest bit of pushback. You know what I mean? It's just if the media and if organizers of debates or whatever, if they just took 2 seconds to provide it, there's no answering this, okay? Because it's garbage. There's no defending this. It's not logic. It's not reasoning. A 10-year-old could rip these people apart.
Like, what's funny is that little exchange I just had, that was on CGTN, which is a Chinese state-owned media, and it's one of the few places where I can personally go to have debates with people that I disagree with, because I can't do that on CNN or MSNBC.
I think the most important thing is just the saving grace. I mean, as Kate pointed out, this is a pretty dark, useful idiots episode, but the saving grace is that we can now put these things out there, and with social media, listen, people forgot about the Iraq War so quickly. Okay, I mean, that's just been like watching it happen. It's not like, a generation has passed and all. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, people just don't pay attention to things. And I mean, people have lives. People go through. People don't pay attention. I mean, you can't blame them. But the thing that we are able to do now is actually remind people right away. You can put a split screen tweet that will have the BBC saying Azov Battalion is neo-Nazi, and the BBC now saying, is Azov Battalion really neo-Nazi? You're able to do things that you, for the first time in history ever, that you've never been able to do before, which is also why you pose an existential threat to the military-industrial complex, to use the old phrase.
This has been so great. Really grateful that you talked to us. Really excited about having you on. It's been really great chat. So just want to thank you. Your perspective is so important. It's totally absent.
If Russia's committing war crimes, that's true. Not everybody who fights Russia is a good guy. That is also true. Okay. And the last thing I just want to say, if possible, is the Azov Battalion isn't good for Ukraine. The vision of Ukraine as a vibrant democracy, okay? These, in their spare time when the conflict became frozen, I mean, it was never really frozen, but when it became simmered down, they would be going after LGBT groups. They would be breaking things up like that. They would be, intimidating courts. People are like, oh, well, if you mention Azov, you're really serving Putin. No, I think the best thing for Ukraine would be to become a thriving democracy. That would be the best revenge they could ever have on Russia, and the Azov Battalion isn't helping them, and we're saying, oh, it's just one group. Okay, so disband them, so control them. Why, if this is just one group, why are we talking about this all the time? Why is Western media lavishing all this praise on them? Fight. There's millions and millions and millions of other Ukrainians. Can't you find their wives to talk to and to meet the Pope and to do other things? So this is not about attacking Ukraine. This is about combating white supremacy, and this is about a Ukraine that should be good. And the Azov Battalion does not reflect Ukraine, which you know what I mean, which is not anti-Semitic, which is a wonderful nation. So it's not, when we talk about getting rid of them, it's not serving Moscow. It's serving the notion of having a free and democratic Ukraine.
Lev Golinkin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, and everyone read his book too.
That's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Lev, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
That was a great interview.
Lev is so knowledgeable about Ukraine. If you want to read more, his memoir, again, is called A Backpack, a Bear, and 8 Crates of Vodka. A very heartening and powerful memoir of growing up in Ukraine and coming to the U.S. as a refugee, with a lot of history that's very, very resonant today, as we heard in that interview. So thankful to Lev Golinkin for speaking to us.
So great. One of my favorite interviews we've done. So good. And we will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you rate and review, leave us a bunch of stars. That's how we can defeat Pod Save America.
And if you want more, go to usefulidiots.substack.com for bonus content, including from this interview.
Oh my gosh. You're definitely going to want to access the extended interview from this week. It's so good.
All right, everybody. See you next week.
Everyone. Bye. Hello, thank you so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For full episodes and extended interviews, please subscribe at usefulidiots.substack.com. You can subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/usefulidiots for clips, live streams, and full episodes. Also, subscribe to us wherever you find your podcast. Follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod and use the hashtag UsefulIdiotsPod. Join us Mondays at 10 a.m. for the Useful Idiots Monday Morning Show, where we discuss the Sunday morning news shows so you don't have to watch them.